So it is now time to go on to panel number 3. So I welcome everyone back, and we're going to go into a panel that is going to have a discussion on communication and the challenges we face with 5 generations in the workforce, moderated by Dr. June DePonte Sernak. Dr. Sernak, please, the floor is yours.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So welcome to NJBIA's Stronger Together Diversity and Inclusion Summit. We're pleased to bring an esteemed panel of leaders together to discuss generations in the workforce. As mentioned, I'm Dr. June DePonte Sernak, statewide diversity consultant for the Center for Family Services, as your moderator for today's session. I'm so excited to have the privilege of kicking off this panel. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. Complete bios for our panels can be found in the speaker section of the event webpage, and there will be time set aside for questions at the end of the panel discussion. So if a question comes up to you, by all means, send it to us through the question chat feature, and we'll try to get to all of them. We're also recording this session, so if anything happens with your technology, please know that we can get you a recording once the session wraps. So now I'd like to begin by introducing our panel for today's discussion. We're joined by 3 esteemed colleagues. We're joined today by Beanne DeGuzman, Reggie Lewis, and Jim Horne from United Way. I'm going to give each panelist a chance to introduce themselves. Beanne?
Hi, everyone. Dr. Jim, hello. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Beanne. Actually, it's Beanne DeGuzman. I am the Director of Philanthropy and Marketing here at iLearn Schools. iLearn Schools is a nonprofit public charter school organization that runs, operates, manages public charter schools in Northern New Jersey and New York. We currently have 15 campuses, 14 campuses here in Northern New Jersey and 1 in the Bronx. And next year, we're growing into 17 campuses, 2 campuses in New York, and then 1 campus here in Northern New Jersey. We currently serve Hudson County, Bergen County, and Passaic County. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think we lost Reggie, so we'll hopefully get him back in shortly. Jim, I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself.
Sure, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is James Horne, the president of United Way of Greater Union County. I've been here in this role since for about 15 years. Our organization serves residents of all of Union County and North and South Plainfield by providing critical support to stabilize families. At the end of this month, I'll be moving on from United Way to join as the CEO of Junior Achievement of New Jersey, where we'll be focusing on helping young people develop financial literacy skills. So excited to be here and excited to be a part of this conversation.
Fantastic. And welcome, Reggie. We're going to give you a second to introduce yourself as well.
All right. Good afternoon. I'm Reggie Lewis, Executive Director of the Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership here at Seton University. I'm also on the faculty. My journey has entailed the philanthropic, nonprofit, state municipal government sectors, but I've had the privilege of spending the last few years with a few millennials and younger, and I'll spend today talking about some of those experiences and what I think is a critical conversation with respect to creating and sustaining a much more inclusive work environment for everyone. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you. So welcome, everyone. So according to Indeed, in today's workplace, it might not be uncommon to see employees of multiple generations working side by side. Our character traits and work habits are shaped by our personalities, not just by our age. But it might be helpful to understand some of the historic and social influences that have impacted each generation. So today we have 5 generations in the workforce, consisting of traditionalists, which are those born between 1928 and 1945, which are about 3% of the workforce. Baby boomers born between 1946 and 1964, making up a large part of our population. Gen X born between 1965 and 1980, which accounts for 40 to 50 million Americans. Generation Y, born between 1981 and 1996, which are the millennials, the first generation to truly grow up at the age of technology advances, and they are the fastest growing segment. And Generation Z, born between 1997 and 2015. They're just entering the workforce and have lived experiences from 9/11 to the pandemic. Our panel will discuss bias in the generation, impacts on hiring, onboarding and retention, work-life balance, and the tools and best practices they use to create a cross-collaborative environment for all. So we're going to begin with our first question. Can each of you share your perceptions and potential biases of the generations in the workforce?
I can go. Reggie, do you
Hey,
want to go
Robin.
first?
Sure.
We'll yield to the lady.
Thank you.
All right, here we
One
go.
of the things that I have noticed is that organizations work so hard to figure out the new generation that they don't stop to realize the conversation around bridging generational divide isn't one-sided. As much as younger generation needs to learn from the older generation needs to also learn from the younger generation. Some of the comments I've heard are millennials are slackers, boomers are technically challenged, Gen Xers demand work-life balance, Gen Zers only communicate via text. And these are just some of the comments I've heard, and probably you might have heard as well. These stereotypes are mental shortcuts because they make it easier for us to process all the information that we face. And the problem is often we intentionally keep this information that keeps the stereotype and drop the rest of all the other things, right? So while most people will work at debunking the stereotypes, generational biases seem to skip criticisms. It is what it is. That's what their response is. An older employee forgets to unmute on Zoom, and everyone, sometimes even the employee, gets a little dig in, kidding them about their lack of tech know-how. And I've seen so many of this. We have a lot of younger generation in our workforce. We have about 800 staff members within our iLearn Schools network. And probably about 70% of the makeup is the younger generation, which is the younger millennials up to the Gen Zers. So in truth, most baby boomers and Gen Xers have had to adapt to learn more technology in the past 30 years than younger employees have ever experienced. But, you know, intergenerational stereotype persists in many organizations these days.
If I could just piggyback on those comments, I think that everything that my colleague said is correct. And I would almost think about it this way, that, you know, we are all from our own culture and understand who we are. And I think really one of the challenges that I see in the workforce is in this intergenerational mix is the maybe just the unwillingness to understand the other person's perspective and their background and their experiences. So yes, you know, maybe the baby boomers are more technology challenged, but that's okay. And as someone who has those skills to really help and communicate with those individuals so that they can be a part of the new platforms and vice versa. What does work-life balance mean? And then how do I respect that? And also allow my colleague to, you know, celebrate their backgrounds and their needs and understand how to work with the person. So I think that it's really comes down to a willingness to acknowledge that, yes, we're all different. But, you know, how do we as individuals move forward to understand and respect those differences, to communicate appropriately, and to move the activities and initiatives of the organization along effectively. I think that's really the one of the things that I would hope to see more of, but I think we're lacking in that space.
Absolutely. Reggie?
I just want to build on part of June's question with respect to the biases that particularly we see here on campuses and in the higher ed community. And I want to tackle one particular bias with respect to the misperceptions of how technology has influenced the thinking of millennials and younger. So obviously, as June and others have alluded to, generation Y and Z, they've got the benefit or the blessings of growing up with the most advanced technology possible. That reality is often cited as a contributing factor for the fostering of a culture of individualism, right? So that young people who sort of stay in these insular bubbles, largely supported by social media platforms. But let me say today that contrary to popular belief, while the technology certainly enables a focus on the individual, the young people that we see here, and I think young people broadly speaking, have very, very strong beliefs for shaping a better society. Let me cite the Millennial Impact Report of 2019, which validates the fact that young people very much care about social issues, using their collective voice, and supporting others for the greater good beyond partisan politicking. Recent examples include the involvement and the organizing of young people with respect to the mitigation of gun violence, advocacy around climate change. This same report cites the fact that if millennials believe that they can improve the world, and in 2016, 86% said that they can make a difference, then they clearly want to do as much of that as possible. So I wanted to really get that out in the front with respect to an ongoing bias about the thinking of millennials with respect to shaping a better world.
I love that. That's absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. I think trying to improve our thought process around bias and stereotypes is key to all the conversations that we've heard today. So each of you come from very different industries, such as corporate, nonprofit, and education. Can you give me examples of the differences you encounter when hiring, interviewing, and maybe onboarding individuals as they come from various generations?
You know, while there are a number of ways to approach this organization's recruitment and onboarding program, they should all align with the culture and values an organization holds, right? So the hiring, the onboarding should speak to the unique individual who is joining, who is touching on their own concerns and potential challenges rather than us focusing on the generation. In a study, actually, it was very interesting. Reggie cited the study. There was also a study that young generations want to see diversity showcased during the hiring and interviewing process. I thought that's very interesting to say. 39% who were surveyed said that they look into company whether the leadership is diverse. And they also look if an organization has employee-led groups to foster diversity and inclusion. And also if an employer gives to charities or social organizations promoting diversity. So those are the things that I think would be interesting for us to look into when we hire and recruit younger generation. I think for onboarding process, again, different types of styles, different type of individuals. A good onboarding program for baby boomers should capitalize on their self-awareness and experience. I mean, they've been in the work for so many years. So instead of guessing how this individual person might work, it's better to ask, you know, delve into their learning style, into their work style. Does he or she love strategizing in a group or enjoying independent work environments? You know, discuss the technology that is used within the office. Do you use email? Do you use instant messaging? Do you use text message? Touch and connect with their comfort level and online tools and processes. That way they understand that, you know, they must participate accordingly and that they can approach, you know, proper method. I think for younger generation, they like to have an on-the-job training where they can get their hands into actual workplace projects. I've seen that with a lot of our younger teachers. They also like, they're also very, what do you call that? They're very, they love the work-life balance because they paved the way into that. But millennials, they're actually the most talked about employees nowadays. They make up nearly the population in our workplace. Many are just beginning to work their way out of entry-level positions. Some of them are still starting their professional journey. Some millennials may not know exactly how they prefer to work or what helps them establish their skills in a workplace. So, you know, reach out to them, and they have the desire for meaningful work and the potential to see career growth. This is where you actually need to support them. Onboarding programs won't probably be what guides a millennial to success. They might find it boring and inspired. Instead, do the on-the-job training. Many understand their lack of experience, so the potential for skill development and helpful feedback actually excites them. And this is what I've seen throughout the onboarding and hiring process that I'm involved with our HR department.
Wonderful. James, would you like to add to that?
Just a little. I mean, we're obviously our mission is very focused on supporting people in the community. So part of the interview process, that I like to engage with all potential candidates is how do they see themselves contributing, and really listen to from them based upon what they understand about our mission and understand about their work style and skills, how that really will fit into the organization, and then overlay that with some conversation around what our processes have been, get some responses to that, and just with an openness to understand that we're really looking to infuse talent and have talent work together. Here's the team, here are the tools, and allow them the opportunity to talk about how they could maximize what exists and or create change and improvement and efficiency. I think that's really key. But then as you onboard and really, the 90, 60, days, 120, you have to walk the talk. So what does teaming look like? How do you show them that their voice is valued? And I think that's really a part of, moving from the onboarding to having an employee that feels valued and fulfilled within the organization.
Yeah. Reggie?
Yeah, both James and Beanne are speaking to the notion of maintaining engagement early on. And I find that our young people in particular, to Beanne's point, they can easily be bored unless you quickly help them to recognize their creativity in the nature of the work itself. And so we talk about emotional ownership on this part. And so if young folk who are working for you in particular can recognize their creativity across the various tasks and projects assigned, they're more likely to not just show up, but show up and bring their best to the work at hand. Then quickly, I also make certain that my team and I reinforce and reclarify expectations. I think there's a misperception that in the smaller nonprofit shops in particular, that you don't have to work as hard. How often have I been told by young folk, woo, long hours? Yes. And the other is attention to details, right? So my folk here are fond of sort of mocking me when I say the first draft is not golden, right? So those little things all I think are critical to onboarding a person so that there's the success that we all hope for.
Yeah, and I know that we talked in the past too about looking at resumes and making sure that we pronounce people's names correctly, making sure that they have a full understanding of that, gender neutral pronouns, looking at things and not looking at their resumes and just automatically putting them in different buckets and using the bias from what you see in that as well. There's also so many great resources that we know between NJBIA and even John Harmon alluded to this about going out to the right places to hire the right people by going to dynamic organizations that will be able to help give them that background, that inclusiveness as well. So setting expectations, having an open dialogue, all critical to establishing trust and an inclusive work environment. Also, building a diverse workplace is attributed with anything from higher employee retention to increased profits. The more diverse an organization is, we've seen profits and productivity increase by 35%. So to create that collaborative environment, I would imagine can be challenging. So I think we talked a little bit about this in some of your responses, but what tools or communication methods do each of you use to engage the generations in your work environment? I'm interested to hear also about from the education perspective, especially with some of the younger people. So maybe Beanne, you can talk to a little bit about what you're using to communicate within your environment.
Yeah. There's actually no perfect way to communicate across generations, right? But we do use a lot of different technologies. These communication differences are actually causing some issues right now because they are so pronounced, especially in a big organization, right? So that's why, again, to your point earlier, onboarding is critical for setting communication expectations, right? Again, I don't want to set the stereotype, but Generation Z grew up attached to devices and they constantly communicate. And I've seen that and probably have seen that also. While older generations, they're used to signing off at 5 p.m. And I see my mom doing that. After 5, I'm done, no more emails, right? So when employees of any age are hired, we should learn as leaders to know their workplace style. So is texting the boss or a client or a student or a teacher appropriate? Do you send emails on the weekends? Can you expect a response, or is it acceptable to respond on Monday morning? So once we learn this, then we can tailor our communication to the person more than the generation. So in our particular office, we actually use varying tools to reach to many different staff members. So we follow up our email with a mass phone call. I don't know if you have that capability, but we do have this third-party software where we can actually send text messages to all our staff members. So it's like an alert, right? So you just get it. There's no school tomorrow, inclement weather. So we use that for our students, but we also use that for our staff members. A lot of the staff members that I've talked to, they're like, why are you calling me? Why are you calling me? Text me. I don't like to be called. I don't want my phone to be called. If I don't know the number, I'm not going to respond to that. So just text me. So that's why we use that. So we have the big email, mass email, and then we follow up with a text message. And we also even do phone calls. It's also an automated phone call. And we also have the instant messaging. I kid you not, I have so many groups in my instant messenger that we use. We use WhatsApp. And in our WhatsApp, within that instant messaging is probably a dozen different groups: executives, directors, K-3 teachers, K-5 teachers, high school teachers, high school directors. When our CEO actually wants to convey a special message of thanks or motivational words, he records himself and send it to everyone. And our teachers and our staff love that because they can relate to them. They can actually, oh, wow, he's so cool. And at the same time, the older generation, you know, they're getting the hang of it, and they're getting more comfortable facing the camera, talking in front of the camera. And, you know, but more importantly, aside from these tools, just remember to communicate with authenticity. I was just saying that earlier on when we were doing our small networking. We have to communicate with authenticity, empathy, and appreciation across all generations. Don't try to sound like older to reach your older audience, or younger so younger generation can relate to you. Just be your authentic self and be who you are as a leader and as a colleague.
That's awesome. James?
I think one of the things that happened, I think was very helpful for the society, one of the outgrowths of the pandemic, is that we learned to use different tools to communicate. So the comfort level across all generations in using Teams and Zooms, I think has really benefited society overall and the work communication strategy. And to your point earlier, in terms of whether it's a text or an email, what I tend to see happen is, you know, the team will understand what vehicle will get the quickest response, and that becomes the vehicle that you use to engage with that particular individual. You know, so and I like to see that organic process develop, so it's not so standardized. And again, getting back to meeting people where they are, and understanding that the ultimate goal is to get the work done. So let's not allow these artificial barriers to get in the way. And if I know that John likes to communicate via text message and he's going to respond immediately, then guess how I'm going to communicate with John, because I don't want to be stuck in his voicemail for 2 weeks. So, you know, again, so there's some ownership on both sides in terms of understanding who you're trying to communicate to, and then understanding how they communicate the best, and using that and being mindful and respectful of that is important.
I'm guilty of that. I've seen a couple of icons on different phones. I'm like, I don't even know what that is.
Well, you know, I'll get, well, I emailed you. Well, okay. You know, I will answer your call or text, but you know, my email box has 6,000. So let's understand how we want to get this done, right?
That's true.
One of the first things that I learned actually on the Rutgers campus is just how infrequent emails can be answered. So I know, to Beanne's point and to James's point, more about WhatsApp than I ever want to share. But I think one, high quality and frequent check-ins, whether it's via emails or just popping your head into somebody's office, is key. So members of your team want to know that you are thinking about them and that you care about them, and not just when it's time to hold them accountable for something. So that's the first point. The other thing is something we learned very recently here at the Greenleaf Center at Seton Hall from one of our partner organizations. This whole notion of the stay interview, STAY. We often talk about the exit interview, but this group that we were working with, actually, we were providing resources to them. We happened to walk away learning more about a particular process from a bank, actually, and it's called the stay interview. And so incorporating or flipping the whole notion of mid and final year performance reviews to focus a bit less on accountability and more on, not only how are you doing, but how might we shift this work environment so that we are tapping into your best interests and strengths as a sustainability approach, in terms of retaining talent. So I would highly recommend the stay interview, and something actually we want to build on to support some of our other partner organizations with.
That's great. I started out my career in 25 years in telecom, selling the first BlackBerry. And so I came from a whole different methodology of communication. And I just learned what Slack is. So I was like, whoo, look at me go. That's awesome.
But it's also very interesting to note, again, just breaking the stereotypes, right? I've also seen a handful of I'm actually quite surprised when they come and I have to teach them technology, which is not a bad thing, but I'm just saying that this is when you really truly understand that, you cannot lump the people in the same category just because, right? Just because, oh, they're young, they're 22 years old, so they should know technology. Because I've had that mistake where I didn't do the proper onboarding, didn't teach them technology, and I just left her to do whatever, I thought she is capable of doing. And then I realized that, it's not always like that.
No, that's a perfect example. So those are all really fantastic tools, and I'm sure really impactful for that inclusive environment. And we are living in extraordinary times. So what are some of the key concerns that are shared in this generational differences with really striving for work-life balance? And how does that impact their activity in the workplace? Beanne, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so a lot of the older generations, they often stay longer with, with their employer because they have a sense of higher responsibility. Again, I'm not, I'm not stressing any stereotype, but they really have higher responsibility within a workplace. But it can also mean more stress and less work-life balance. But however, I've been noticing that due to the pandemic, older generations are now attracted to flexible schedule options as they transition out of the workforce. They want to manage their health conditions. They want to just care for their aging parents or spouse. They just want to take care of kids, grandkids, or they just simply want to enjoy retirement. So I think they're at a point where, they're just kind of, I'm not saying waiting it out, but just trying to see that, again, this is also due to the pandemic. My mother-in-law at 84 years old, finally just retired from being a doctor at 84 years old. So she's coming to a point where she's really done with work activity and just want to do the life activity. The Generation X and older millennials, they had built a reputation for challenging traditional structures that help push work-life balance ideals. So many of this generation are straddling the line between parenthood, caring for parents, volunteering their time, pursuing higher education, so many of these career goals, right? So flexible work hours or the ability to work from home is particularly appealing options to this generation. And we've lost a lot of people last year, not because of the organizational culture, but because they prefer to work from home. The younger millennials, Generation C, they also put emphasis on their life outside the work, and they prefer to work smarter, actually, not harder. They place great value on vacation time. They want to telecommute. They dress casually. In addition, the stress levels related to financials and healthcare are a top concern for this generation. They are also more interested in a robust healthcare plan from an employer and opportunities to earn raises to support their lifestyle outside of work. So we do have a lot of activities here. We have wellness We have wellness day. We have also stress relief day, that for one day they can just say, I'm taking off because I want to de-stress. So that's how we're also kind of taking care of the mental health of our younger generations, and actually all our staff members. They also like to hear, and this is the first time I've heard it from the younger generation, toxic, what do you call that? Toxic appreciation or something, toxic motivation. So our school directors are older and they like to motivate our younger, like, hey, we can do this. We're happy, we're this, we're that. But for them, they call it toxic. So, and I've heard from some of our students, some of our younger students and some of our staff members that nowadays it's not okay to be okay, which is kind of scary. So those are the things I think we should be focusing on as we work our way through work-life balance, especially after, pivoting from the pandemic.
I agree.
Yeah.
James, what are you hearing?
Well, I think, it's pretty interesting and complicated. So, as a employer of a small group of 20 individuals, want to acknowledge and establish, the same platform for everyone. So where work-life balance is valued, and here's the parameters in which we as an organization can afford you those opportunities, and kind of thinking through, as we acknowledge the need for work-life balance, not losing the fact that work needs to be completed. And in our case, people are depending upon us performing certain tasks in a timely fashion, and really trying to blend the two, but also establish a platform for everyone, so that obviously one size doesn't fit all, but there needs to be some rubric in which every employee has expectations and opportunities, and they need to be consistent for lots of reasons, and obviously not to one of those not to be showing favoritism to one person over the other, but here's the standard, here's how we can move forward. And then understanding that for some individuals, those set of rules may or may not fulfill what they need in terms of work-life balance, and then being able to have those conversations about what that means in terms of their future with the organization, and be okay with that. And I think, that's there has to be some boundaries, but the understanding of flexibility within those boundaries.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that the concerns with respect to burnout, quality of life in general, are universal concerns that obviously run across all of the generational cohorts. I'm struck by one data point I'll share with you all, that in the first half of 2021, Gallup reported that only 36% of all workers were engaged. By the second half of 2021, that dropped to 34%. So basically 2/3 of our workforce are for the most part unengaged. And so offering flexibility, being attuned to the fact that the quality of the work life matters, are key things that all of us as leaders have to be attentive to on a regular basis. Or again, it's that revolving door that gets to the Great Resignation phenomenon and so many other things that we're all concerned about.
Yeah, definitely. Each generation has extraordinary hurdles and challenges to acclimate to. As we continue to build diverse environments, professional development and training is crucial to providing direction for the mission and vision of all of our organizations. Are there any best practices that may be useful when communicating or resolving conflicts between the generations in the workforce that you're implementing in your organizations?
Could I just jump in quickly, because it's less of a best practice and really more of a common sense practice, and that really speaks to working to avoid toxic behavior from festering. So the minute you're made aware of anything that will shake the harmony of your team, you got to be on top of that. And that's more than just adhering to what your grievance policy is, but I think sort of preemptively maintaining this culture in which everybody's valued and treated with respect, but also looking for ways to constantly do the team building, including, I have a couple of young people here who talk about my corny brown bags, but, figuring out ways to bring people together on a regular basis, And again, making certain that anything that shakes or threatens the harmony of your team is addressed ASAP.
Absolutely. I agree.
If I could just piggyback on that, I think allowing your team to celebrate those events that are important to them, and that really, I think, creates a synergy, because what's important to me, my 25th year wedding anniversary versus I just adopted a little poodle, but again, it all has a place in terms of creating camaraderie amongst the group. I think that's important. To Reggie's point, not letting things fester, and so you'll get the comment that I observed employee X leaving 5 minutes early, and there's two parts of that conversation. It's the person that brought the issue to you, and then it's also the conversation with the employee that was subject to that. You just not out anyone, but hey, this is the environment you're working in, and just be mindful of how you work. And then also, well, yes, John left early, but John's going to go home and log onto his computer for 10 minutes. So so really allowing that conversation to be transparent and clear, to make sure that everyone understands that, there is some flexibility and here's how we're managing it. But at the same time, there are rules, and you need to understand how, when you're deviating from the rules, how your behavior could be viewed by some of your associates.
Great.
Those are very, very good points. And I think most important also is we should be sure to avoid obvious discriminatory biases, right? Like what we've been talking about, such as thinking that older workers are incapable of using technology, and treating younger generation as if they know everything about technology. We should also treat our employees or our colleagues based on merit instead of age. When we recognize their individual strengths and weaknesses, we actually foster objective evaluations, and we minimize preconceived notion about, again, the general generational differences. Organizations should also look for commonalities that bind our employees and our colleagues, and use those shared traits to bridge generational divide. Perhaps a group of employees are all natural leaders, or maybe they all require team-based collaboration. Perhaps everyone is deeply invested in the end result of the project they're working on and can find motivation through a shared sense of passion. In either case, age is irrelevant. Finding commonalities can increase employee trust and dispel stereotypical narratives about age groups. Are your events appealing only to a certain age group, such as interactive digital-only events that attract primarily millennial employees? Do most events take place after work hours, putting a strain on employees with young children? Are your events designed in a way that would, whether intentionally or not, exclude a generation of employees? So when you create events that benefit or interest employees of all ages, it lets all your coworkers know that you acknowledge and foster their differences. One of the things that we're also doing here is cross-generational mentoring. We pair a younger employee so that they can teach efficiency and effectiveness through technology and teamwork, whereas an older employee may be able to teach pattern recognition, comprehension of the bigger picture, or other insights that come from practice and experience. I remember my mother-in-law saying that when she retired, a lot of her patients said that they were sad because they like how she does her thing, because she's older, the patient doctor relationship is very different. It's very different because they see the face-to-face, the what do you call that? They do face-to-face. My mother-in-law does not look at a computer. She talks to the patient, and that's what the patients love. And nowadays, some doctors, younger doctors, all they do, and I've had that experience where I come into my doctor, they're on the computer, they don't even look at me, and they just ask me questions, and that's it. So I think that's the cross-generational mentoring that is necessary in a generation. So, to end, let's embrace the differences in the communication preferences of each generation and teach our coworkers to do the same. Encourage a range of communication methods, foster a culture that respects each generation's values and watch those challenging communication gaps actually grow smaller and smaller. Because nowadays, everyone from all generations, we use WhatsApp, we use videos, we use all this technology, and they're comfortable with that. Organizations that are having these dialogues and practices from all generational points of view, old and new, as Dr. June Sernak said, they have the most success with retention and workplace productivity.
I think that's fantastic. And I think really, would you like to add anything else to this? Because I know that some of the organizations that we've talked to have new people that are coming in. So maybe things that they've changed even in their employee handbooks or how they do things on a day-to-day basis, that they've changed some of the things about work attire. Have you seen any other things that you'd like to mention during that as well? My husband recently hired a young man to work with him in supply chain, and his fingernails were painted. And my husband said, because he wasn't used to seeing something like that, especially on an interview when the person came dressed, fairly casual, but he ended up getting the job because he was the best candidate for the position. So I was glad to hear that the interviewing process wasn't limited to, appearance or, any one specific thing, and that he was hired. So have you seen anything additional that, you would recommend for anyone in our audience to pay attention to?
Well, I would think for those that are active job seekers, I would suggest, as you engage with the particular organization, to understand your role in the onboarding process, in terms of understanding and learning the culture that exists between the employees or your potential coworkers, and doing your best to respect that as you onboard. I mean, because one of the things that you find is, I'm going to change the culture. Well, that's how productive is that, that I'm going to make this organization bend to who I am versus trying to be flexible enough to work to make myself part of the team. So I think that's one thing that, I think we need to be comfortable as employers saying, okay, here's how we are, here's who we are, what's your fit, and how can you contribute, going back to my opening comments. I think it's really important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't know if there are any questions in the chat feature at this particular time. Let's see. I love it. Yeah, the cross-generational training is great. I love the mentoring piece of it. I think that's fantastic. Jackie, I don't know if you see any other questions or concerns for our panel for today.
I actually don't see any, but I have a couple of comments and maybe a question in there, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you all so much for a highly informative, you talk about edgy, when we talk about multi-generational anything, it gets very, very interesting, very fast. But Jerry, I have to say that I love what you said. Best practices have to include common sense.
Yeah.
So in hearing all of you speak, the common denominator I feel with all of this is critical thinking, right? How do I approach this person? Something as simple as, how do I approach this person? Or do I, to ask them about the nail polish on their fingernails? Is that appropriate? Critically think. How do I communicate with an entire, Beanne, you look at iLearn schools, you are in multiple sites. How do I best communicate with the Bronx? How do I best communicate with home office, right? All these things of critical thinking. How, can you share with us any successes or a success example of how you've determined what a best practice is within your organizations and how you got there?
Who would like to take that?
Yeah, I could take that. Jackie, as I mentioned earlier, one of the biggest issues that we have is communication, right? We figure that a lot of our staff members don't read emails. We send multiple emails, hundreds of emails. Hey, there's a meeting. Hey, we have this, we have that, but they barely read the email. And I wonder why. I mean, coming from a generation where email is very important, that you have to read it, I'm quite surprised. So each of our school district, we always do have surveys at the end of the school year. And part of that is the communication preference. And we found out that, again, a lot of the older generation, and by older generation, I would mean the baby boomers, the Gen Xers, the Gen Xers and the older millennials, they prefer email because it's not intrusive for them. But the younger generation, very surprised because they actually love receiving text messages than emails because they said they don't read emails. So that being said, instead of us saying, well, no, you have to read your email, this is a memo, or else there's an accountability for that, we had to adapt also as leaders. So that's why, as again, to my point earlier, after emailing, we follow it up with phone calls and text messages. So we find that actually have been very successful in terms of communicating across all districts.
A great example. Great example. James, Lewis, anything? I mean, Reggie, any?
Yeah, so I would add, in our sort of prep session, the four of us chatted about sort of like a fine line to walk, right? So there's a bit of an old-fashioned soul in me that still feels like, while I agree with Beanne about finding, and James with finding the most appropriate and most comfortable medium in which generations Y and Z prefer to operate, there's also still some responsibility in helping our younger members of our team to recognize that you may not like those emails, but sometimes you really do have to read emails.
Yep.
And so helping them to understand, again, back to the sort of clarifying, re-clarifying expectations, you can't attach certain documents on certain kinds of, let me say, DM or direct messages. So I think being accommodating, but also helping folks to understand that the work environment is inclusive of a range of ways in which we all have to communicate in order to get the job done.
I think for me, one of the successes that I've noticed is, as I engage with individuals and ask them for suggestions and information, how excited the entire team gets, not just, and so it's cross-generational. That ability to be feel that you're valued is important. And for me, walking around the office and then saying, hey, well, Joe said this, you might want to talk to Dawn, and you guys can kind of talk about this together and come see me. It creates a forum, if you will, for that conversation to happen naturally between two individuals who might be in different generations, but ultimately now they see some commonalities or common ground to work on. And that's been one of the things that I think has been successful for me as a leader in terms of building.
And also to Jim's point, and something Beanne mentioned earlier, that the comfort among the younger cohorts with respect to technology does not preclude their yearning for those pop-ins and those more interpersonal opportunities for more interpersonal interactions. So I take advantage of that as much as I can.
I agree. And I love anything that we can do to bring the groups together. So whether it's, team building events or
Absolutely.
conversations and lunch and learns, they seem to be really dynamic to be able to have people open up and have those honest conversations.
Yeah. As Beanne was saying before, to pick an event for everyone may not be the right answer. Maybe it's several different team buildings so that everyone can be satisfied or heard or listened to or feel valued, and things like that. I just had to share an example of what I think is just a little baby step, but pretty impactful, of one of my clients, the CEO. She has older children. Her 11 p.m. starts her, okay, I can do whatever I need to do now. And she found that when she was sending out emails at 11, people were, oh my gosh, answering at that point because she's the CEO. And I've seen this in a couple of situations now, where she will say, I am sending out this email at a time that is convenient for me. Please do not feel compelled to answer outside of your normal work hours. This is just what works for me. And I think that is, you talk about transparency. where, some people are morning people, some people are evening people. We get to what we can get to when we get to it. And so I just thought that that was a very, very cool thing, and probably took a ton of pressure off of people who felt, oh my gosh, she's the CEO, got to answer right away. So any comments on that? Any other tricks like that anyone wants to share?
Well, for me, it's in the reverse. So my team usually gets the emails around between 6:30 and 7 as I'm making my way to the pool. But it's understood as long as it's answered by maybe 9:30 or 10, we're okay. So absolutely with respect to sort of like establishing the rhythm of the way in which the office can operate, I think is key. And as long as it's communicated, I think people tend to be okay.
So if I could just piggyback on that point from a different perspective. So there are times when I do need a response after hours, and I'll just own that, right? And what I find is that I'm going to get a response because my team understands that, okay, he's texting me on a Saturday morning. He really needs this. And I try to be respectful of not sending multiple emails out after hours, because I do want them to understand that that text message asking a question is something that if they can take 2 minutes out to respond to would be very helpful for me, and then not overwhelm them unnecessarily with things that they might confuse with that same level of priority.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's awesome. I think that concludes our time for today. So thank all of you for your time and your dedication to these important topics. Thank you to our panelists, Beanne. It's great to have you, Reggie, James. Thank you so much, and Jackie for assisting us today. So we'll turn it back over to our friends at NJBIA, and thank you for the opportunity. And again, I'm June DePonte Sernak, and it's been a pleasure to moderate this panel with my esteemed colleagues.
Thank you, June.
Thank you, June.
Thank you all so much.
Thank
So June, Reggie, Joe, and Beanne, thank you all so much for all of that wonderful information. Truly challenging dealing with so many different generations. So thank you for all of that great wealth of information. So at this time, I would just like to say thank you so very much for allowing me the privilege of being your MC for today. It has been just a wildly informative. My head is a little spinning, I gotta say, if I'm gonna be honest with you, because the information is that important, it is that compelling, and it is that urgent, I want to say. So let us continue our work together. Let us not stop the conversation here, please, because it is so fruitful and so valuable. And other people who did not have the ability or the chance to join us today, we need to get them in on the conversation and continue it.